She counted the money with shaking hands under a flickering streetlight, 12 folded bills for 12 strangers, and only then did she realize the price she'd paid wasn't money at all. If stories about real struggle, redemption, and resilience move you, quietly hit subscribe before we begin. The rain had a way of finding every crack in the city, every broken promise, every person trying to disappear. Mara pulled her thin jacket tighter as she stood beneath the awning of a closed pawn shop, neon reflections trembling in the puddles at her feet. The city breathed around her, sirens in the distance, laughter spilling from bars, the low hum of cars passing without looking. She didn't look at the men when they approached. Not at first. She watched their shoes instead. Clean ones meant hesitation. Worn ones meant urgency. Expensive leather meant they'd leave quickly and never remember her face. That's how she survived, by not being seen. 12 men. She hadn't planned on 12. The night had started with a number in her head. 3. 3 would be enough to cover the overdue rent, the electricity bill, and maybe a sandwich from the all-night bakery. 3 would let her sleep without the familiar knot of panic in her chest. But desperation doesn't respect plans. By the 4th man, the rain had soaked her hair. By the 7th, her legs felt hollow, like they belonged to someone else. By the 12th, she had stopped counting time altogether. Each encounter blurred into the next, not graphic, not detailed, just fragments. The click of a car door, the smell of unfamiliar cologne, the silence afterward that felt louder than any sound. What stayed sharp wasn't what they did. It was what they didn't do. None of them asked her name. Mara was 26 years old, though exhaustion made her look older. Her face still held traces of softness, wide eyes, a mouth that used to smile easily, but life had carved worry lines where laughter once lived. This wasn't who she thought she'd be. Once, she had stood in a graduation gown that didn't quite fit, her mother crying in the audience, whispering, "You'll do better than me." Once, she had believed that promise like it was unbreakable. But promises crack under pressure. Her mother's illness. Medical bills. A job that vanished when the company restructured. A landlord who didn't care about explanations. And finally, a night when the fridge was empty and the eviction notice lay open on the table like a verdict. Mara hadn't woken up wanting this. She'd backed into it slowly, step by step, until there was no room left to turn around. Now, under the awning, she unfolded the money again. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. Shame, maybe. Or fear. Or the quiet realization that survival had taken something from her she didn't know how to name yet. 12 men. Enough money to breathe for another week. But as she tucked the bills into her bag, a sudden wave of nausea rose in her throat, not physical, but emotional. Heavy. Crushing. Because the price had already been paid. Across the street, her reflection stared back at her from a darkened shop window. She barely recognized the woman looking back, eyes dulled, shoulders curved inward, like she was apologizing to the world just for existing. A bus roared past, spraying water onto the curb. Mara flinched. That's when she felt it. Not pain. Not fear. Loss. Something inside her had shifted tonight. Quietly, irreversibly. And though she didn't yet understand what it was, she knew one thing with aching certainty. This night would follow her. No matter how far she ran. The bathroom light flickered the way it always did, on, off, on, like it couldn't decide whether she deserved to be seen. Mara stood barefoot on cold tile, gripping the edge of the sink as if it might slide away from her. The mirror showed too much. She turned the tap on hard, letting the water roar, as if noise alone could erase memory. Steam rose, fogging the glass. For a moment, she let herself believe that when the mirror cleared, she'd be someone else. She wasn't. She peeled off her clothes slowly, each movement careful, deliberate, like she was handling evidence. Purple bruises bloomed along her thighs, not violent, not dramatic, just careless marks left by people who never learned her name. She traced one with her finger, then stopped, her hand hovering, unsure whether touching it made it more real or less. The shower burned hot, then hotter. She scrubbed until her skin turned pink, then red, then raw. Soap slid uselessly down her arms as tears finally came. Not loud, not sobbing, just silent streaks mixing with water. 12 men. The number pulsed in her head like a warning light. She tried to breathe past it. Tried to remind herself why she'd done it. Rent. Bills. Survival. The words felt thin now, like excuses written on paper already soaked through. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel that smelled faintly of mildew, her phone buzzed on the counter. Once. She froze. It buzzed again. Mara stared at the screen, dread pooling in her stomach before she even picked it up. Unknown number. She told herself it was nothing, spam, wrong number, a bill collector, but her thumb hesitated before swiping. A message appeared. You forgot your jacket. Her chest tightened. She scrolled up. No previous messages. No context. Just that single sentence, polite and casual, like they'd shared coffee instead of something she wanted to forget. She typed, erased, typed again. Keep it. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. You sure? It's cold tonight. The concern felt worse than cruelty. Worse than silence. It cracked something open inside her that she'd been desperately trying to seal shut. She didn't reply. The phone buzzed again, different number this time. Had a good time. You free tomorrow? Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The messages stacked up, one after another, as if the night hadn't ended for them the way it had for her. That was when it hit her. This wasn't over. This night wasn't contained to rain and streetlights and folded bills. It had followed her home. Crawled into her bathroom. Sat beside her on the edge of the tub, whispering reminders she couldn't drown out with water or soap. Her chest tightened until breathing felt like work. Mara slid down the wall, sitting on the bathroom floor, towel pulled uselessly in her lap. The phone buzzed again. She didn't look. Instead, her gaze drifted to the counter, where the money lay spread out, damp at the edges. It looked smaller now. Pathetic. Even. Paper weighed against pieces of herself she couldn't count so easily. She'd told herself this was temporary. Just one night. Just until things stabilized. But the messages told a different story. To them, she wasn't a woman who'd made a desperate choice. She was a service. Her stomach twisted violently, and she leaned forward, retching into the toilet, her body rejecting what her mind was still trying to rationalize. Later, she didn't know how much later, she lay on her bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The water stain above her looked like a map of somewhere she might escape to if she could just decode it. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, fragments returned. Hands she didn't want to remember, voices calling her baby or sweetheart without knowing who she was. The worst part wasn't the acts themselves, it was how easily they blurred together, how replaceable she felt in her own memories. Her phone vibrated again. This time, she picked it up. A voicemail notification. She hadn't even heard it ring. Against her better judgment, she pressed play. Hey, a man's voice said, low and familiar in the wrong way. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe. Call me. He sounded normal. Like someone checking on a friend. The disconnect made her chest ache. Mara dropped the phone onto the bed and turned onto her side, curling inward. Her reflection in the dark window looked small, almost childlike, and the sight made something inside her crack open. She whispered, barely audible, "What did I do?" There was no answer. Only the quiet hum of the city outside, still alive, still moving, completely indifferent to the moment her life split cleanly into before and after. This was the price. Not the money. Not the bruises. It was the realization that crossing that line hadn't solved her problems. It had created a new one she didn't yet know how to survive. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the shame, another truth stirred, small, fragile, terrifying. If she didn't stop now, she might never know how. Morning didn't arrive gently. It crashed into Mara's apartment with the shrill cry of sirens and the thud of someone else's footsteps in the hallway. People going to jobs, to lives that still expected them. Light crept through the torn blind and settled on her face like an accusation. She hadn't slept. Her body lay heavy on the mattress, but her mind had been awake all night, pacing, replaying, counting. 12 voices. 12 sets of hands. 12 versions of herself she didn't recognize. Her phone lay on the floor where it had fallen sometime before dawn. She stared at it for a long moment before reaching down to pick it up. 7 unread messages. 3 missed calls. She didn't open any of them. Instead, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed and sat there, elbows on her knees, breathing slowly as if she were preparing for impact. Her muscles ached, not sharply, but deeply, like a bruise you don't notice until you move. The mirror by the door caught her reflection as she stood. She paused. The woman looking back wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, rimmed with red, distant. That frightened her more than tears would have. She dressed mechanically, jeans, a sweater with a loose thread at the cuff, then gathered the money from the counter. She counted it again, though she already knew the number. Enough for rent. Enough for utilities. Enough to survive. She slid it into an envelope, her hand steadier than she expected. That steadiness felt wrong. Like numbness pretending to be strength. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. At the corner store, the cashier smiled at her and asked how her morning was. The normalcy nearly broke her. She mumbled something and stared at the gum rack until the transaction was over. People brushed past her on the sidewalk, parents pulling children along, couples arguing softly, strangers lost in their phones. None of them knew. None of them could tell that something inside her had shifted permanently. That invisibility had once protected her. Now it felt like erasure. By noon, the messages started again. She blocked one number. Then another. Then another. Each block felt like slamming a door that hadn't been hers to open in the first place. But blocking didn't erase memory. At the bus stop, she flinched when a man stepped too close. On the bus, the press of bodies made her chest tighten. A stranger's knee brushed hers and she recoiled, heart hammering, pulse loud in her ears. Get it together, she told herself. But her body didn't listen. That afternoon, she went to see Lila. Lila had been her friend since college, sharp-tongued, observant, the kind of person who noticed everything even when she pretended not to. They hadn't spoken much lately. Life had pulled them into different currents. Still, Mara found herself standing outside Lila's apartment, fist hovering inches from the door, fear blooming in her chest. She could still walk away. She knocked anyway. When Lila opened the door, her expression shifted instantly, from casual annoyance to concern. "Hey," Lila said slowly. "What's wrong?" Mara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She stepped inside and sat on the couch without being asked, hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles went white. Lila watched her for a moment, then sat across from her, quiet, waiting. That patience undid her. "I did something," Mara said finally. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Something I can't undo." Lila didn't interrupt. "I needed money," Mara continued, staring at the floor. "I told myself it was just one night. Just a solution." Her voice cracked on the last word. Understanding dawned slowly on Lila's face. She didn't gasp. She didn't judge. She just leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "How many?" Lila asked gently. Mara swallowed. 12. The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. Lila exhaled slowly, rubbing her hands together as if grounding herself. "Oh, Mara," she said quietly. That was it. Not why, not how could you, not what were you thinking. Just her name. Mara's composure shattered. The tears came fast and hard, her shoulders shaking as she pressed her hands to her face. Everything she'd held in, the fear, the disgust, the loneliness, spilled out in broken sobs. "I don't feel like myself anymore," she gasped. "I feel like I gave something away and didn't even realize it was mine." Lila crossed the space between them and pulled her into a hug. Mara stiffened for a split second, then collapsed against her, clinging like she might fall apart if she let go. "You didn't stop being you," Lila murmured into her hair. "You're still here. You survived." "But at what cost?" Mara whispered. Lila didn't answer right away. "That's the lie," she said finally. "That survival means you owe the world pieces of yourself. You don't." The words settled slowly, not fixing anything, but softening the sharpest edge of Mara's self-loathing. Still, when she left Lila's apartment, the tension returned almost immediately. Because survival had consequences. The landlord accepted the envelope without comment. Relief flickered in his eyes before indifference replaced it. Transaction complete. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. That night, Mara lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Her phone was silent now, no messages, no calls, but the quiet was no comfort. It only gave her space to think. She replayed the night again, but this time with a new lens. Not as a series of actions, but as a moment of crossing. A line she hadn't known existed until she stepped over it. And what terrified her most wasn't that she could do it again. It was that part of her wondered if she would have to. Because poverty didn't disappear with one envelope of cash. Fear didn't vanish because the lights stayed on. And dignity, once shaken, didn't snap back into place. As dawn approached, a thought took hold, quiet but relentless. If she didn't choose something different soon, the city would choose for her. And the next price might be even higher. The call came 2 days later. Mara was standing in the kitchen, staring at a cracked mug she didn't remember buying, when her phone buzzed against the counter. The sound was sharp, invasive, like it had teeth. Unknown number. Her chest tightened instantly. She told herself she didn't have to answer. She had already blocked so many. She had already drawn lines. But something about this call felt heavier, more deliberate. She answered. Hello. A pause. Breathing on the other end. Mara, a man said slowly, like he'd practiced saying her name. You said to call. Her stomach dropped. I didn't, she said, her voice thin. Another pause. Then a soft chuckle, unbothered, confident. Must have been a mistake, he said. But since we're talking, I've got an offer. Her free hand curled into a fist. No, she said immediately. Double what you made that night, he continued, ignoring her. No street. No rain. Just one evening. You won't even have to. No, she said again, louder now. Her heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. Don't call me again. She hung up before he could finish. Her body shook violently as adrenaline surged through her. She slid down the cabinet and sat on the floor, pressing her forehead to her knees. This was it. This was the moment. The city hadn't forgotten her. It had remembered her too well. The offer echoed in her mind, not as temptation, but as threat. Because it came with an unspoken truth, this door is open now. And it will stay open unless you close it. She stayed on the kitchen floor until the shaking stopped. Then she stood. The decision didn't feel brave. It felt desperate. But desperation could still be direction if you let it. Mara grabbed her jacket and left the apartment without locking the door. The community center smelled like coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stood just inside the entrance, heart racing, doubt clawing at her spine. She had passed this building 100 times. She'd never gone in. A woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. Not polite, not rushed. Real. Hi, she said. How can I help you? The words caught in Mara's throat. She almost turned around. Almost walked back into the life that was already reaching for her again. Instead, she said the truth. I need help, she whispered. That was the hardest sentence she'd spoken in years. They didn't ask for details at first. They didn't pry. They gave her a chair, a cup of water, and time. When she finally spoke, about the eviction notice, the money, the night, her voice trembled, but it didn't break. For the first time since that rain-soaked street, she felt something shift. Not relief. Agency. A counselor named Ruth sat with her long after the building should have closed. Ruth didn't flinch at the number. Didn't soften the reality or dramatize it. What happened to you doesn't define what comes next, Ruth said. But you have to choose next. The choice loomed heavy and terrifying. Programs. Shelters. Job training. Therapy. None of it was instant. None of it was easy. All of it required something Mara wasn't sure she had left. Trust. When she stepped back outside, the city looked the same, but she didn't. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She stared at it, thumb hovering. Then she did something she hadn't done yet. She blocked it without listening. No shaking. No hesitation. The victory was small, quiet, almost invisible, but it was hers. And for the first time since that night, she walked home without feeling like she was disappearing. Change didn't arrive like a miracle. It arrived like work. Mara learned that in the weeks that followed. The community center became a place she went even when she wanted to disappear. She showed up on days when her hands shook and on days when shame tried to convince her she didn't belong in rooms full of people who still had options. Ruth was right. Nothing was instant. There were forms, interviews, long conversations that left Mara emotionally wrung out. There were nights she lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had waited too long to turn back. But something had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. The shelter placement wasn't glamorous. Shared rooms, thin walls, rules that felt suffocating at first, but it was safe. And safety, she discovered, was a kind of luxury she had never learned to value until she almost lost herself entirely. She started therapy. The first session, she barely spoke. The second, she cried. The third, she told the truth without flinching. Not just about the night. About the years leading up to it. About how being strong had slowly turned into being silent. About how survival had taught her to shrink instead of ask. Healing wasn't linear. Some days were light enough to breathe through. Others dragged her back into memory without warning. The sound of rain, the vibration of a phone, a stranger's cologne passing too close. But the difference was this. She wasn't alone with it anymore. 3 months later, Mara sat in a small office with peeling paint and a second-hand desk, filling out paperwork for a job training program. Administrative support. Entry-level. Honest work. When the coordinator smiled and said, "Welcome aboard," something inside her loosened. It wasn't pride exactly. It was grounding. That night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and really looked at herself for the first time since the rain-soaked street. Her eyes were clearer. Not unmarked, but awake. "I'm still here," she said out loud. And she believed it. The past didn't vanish. It softened. The night that once felt like a life sentence became something else, a turning point. Not because it was necessary. Not because it was justified. But because it was where she finally chose herself. One evening, months later, Mara walked home under clear skies. The city lights reflected in dry pavement, no longer warped by rain. She passed the pawn shop without stopping. Past the corner where everything had almost ended, and kept going. She had plans now. Small ones. Real ones. A savings account. A lease in her own name. A future that didn't demand pieces of her soul as payment. She slept deeply that night. No buzzing phone. No counting. No shame clawing at her chest. Just rest. The price she paid had been real. But it wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment she stopped disappearing and started coming back to herself. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you think.